work so well together. I don't know why that is.
No, it's almost like I want to date her or something.
Almost.
We are talking about fear today. Fear and freedom, well, what do they have to do with each other? Well, if you think about how this country was founded and why it was founded, the impetus was fear. Fear of a government trying to control where you worship, fear of a government trying to control where you spent your money, what taxes you paid. A whole lot of people in Europe got tired of being afraid, so they did something about it, and they came over here and founded a whole different world. Fear can be a great motivator, but fear can also stop us in our tracks. Fear can block us from receiving all the good that God wants us to have. You know, don't you, that God's will for us is all the joy, all the happiness, all the delight we can possibly stand. But we don't experience that, do we, when we're in a place of fear? As you heard, my talk this morning is called Rollin on the River. And I'm really disappointed you didn't do Proud Mary this morning. Thank you. Okay. Now, you got the mood going here? Rolling on the river. And it's a lesson in taming fear. Do you know that in the New Testament, Jesus the Christ, Yeshua, as he was known in his native language, made about 125 imperative statements. Now, if I were to ask you, what did Jesus talk about? What's the first thing that comes to mind? Love. Do you know of those 125 statements, a grand total of 8 of them speak to love? But of those 125 statements, 21 of them speak to fear. Where Jesus said, fear not, don't be afraid, have courage. Well, if you think back to his time, people he was talking to had a lot to be afraid of. They were living in an occupied country. Things were very tenuous. And beside the political and government aspect, day-to-day existence 2,000 years ago was a dicey prospect. Things that we take for granted all the time were things that they had to be constantly focused on creating. The people Jesus was speaking to had much to be afraid of. And as I think about you and me now, in this time, I think we've got a lot more to be afraid of. Nuclear war, global warming, the fall elections. Boy, doesn't that strike terror in your heart. Then we have our own fears, our own little personal anxieties. Gee, there's going to be too much month left over at the end of the money. That raise, that promotion I've been working so hard for, that's probably not going to happen. Is my partner going to love me the way I need to be loved, the way I'd like to be loved? Think about it for a moment. What are some of the fears, your personal fears, that you entertain? The economy's slipping again. Oh, the cost of everything is going up again, but your paycheck's not, right? There's so much that we have in this place and time that can cause us to feel fear. And if you're feeling fear about any of these things, bless yourself and simply acknowledge the fear and welcome to humanity. Welcome to the human condition. What's exciting to me, though, is as spiritual seekers, we don't need to live in fear. I got a real powerful lesson in this just a few weeks ago over on the other side of town on the Cannon River. My husband and I packed up after church one Sunday morning and drove down to Welch Village and met another couple there. Trotted over to the outfitters and rented watercraft. Now our friends chose a canoe. we chose kayaks. And somewhat to my surprise, not a tandem kayak, but 2 individual kayaks. I've been in a kayak before, but it's been a while, and I've been in a canoe before, and it's been even a longer while. But I knew this was going to be an interesting experience. So the outfitters, they load you on a bus, and they truck you up the road, and they drop you off at the edge of the river. And the gallant gentleman in my group, my husband and his friend, picked up my kayak and hauled it down to the edge of the river and plopped it in the water and escorted me in and got me seated and situated, handed me this paddle that, I don't know if you know, kayak paddles have 2 paddles, so you're going back and forth. And they shoved me off into the river. Okay, I can do this. I know how to paddle. I know how to steer a boat. So I'm kind of getting settled in with my paddles on both sides, trying to get the hang of this and get the feel for this kayak, which is much bigger than any kayak I've ever been in before. I'm sure it was an ocean-going vessel. And I'm starting to head down the river with a lot of help from the current. And all of a sudden I realized that, like, from here to the back of the room are rapids. Do you know that they rate rapids? They rate them on a scale of 1 to 6, depending on how treacherous, which really means how potentially deadly those rapids are. These rapids were so huge, so overwhelming, so frightening, they were not even rated. And there I am, heading straight for the rapids. Now, probably sitting there thinking I'm a total wimp, and you could be right. But there's a little background you need to know about this. Some years ago, my very first experience with whitewater was with a group of friends. And we went to a place where they take you out on the river. They have guides. They put you on crash helmets. You go through all of this instruction on the shore before they even let you near the water. So we went through all the training and instruction, and then we finally piled into this great big rubber raft and headed down the river. And the first set of rapids we hit, the front of the raft caught on the raft as the back of the raft came up and over, and all of us were immediately dumped into the river. And it was not fun. We were dumped on the rocks. We've got all this water beating on us, slamming us even further into the rocks. You wind up battered and bruised. And I remember very distinctly at one point being underwater, unable to figure out which way was up. And the thought in my mind at that moment was, oh, so this is what it's like to drown. It was not a fun experience. I know you're waiting with bated breath, so I will let you in on a secret. I did survive. I made it to the shore, and I laid there, panting with my heart pounding, thinking, I will never do that again. But I survived. This is what's in my mind, down on the Cannon River, me and my little kayak, and that first set of rapids I encountered. The picture in my mind was the whole thing flipping and beating me up and throwing me amongst the rocks and trying to kill me. I knew those huge, monstrous waves coming up 2, 3, 4 inches, threatening to wash over the gunwale of my vessel and send me down to Davy Jones' locker. That was what was going through my mind. But I had something going for me called spiritual principles. And I have this picture of calamity playing out in my mind. Do you ever have those moments where something big, traumatic, dramatic is happening, and all of a sudden time expands, and you're totally present with every iota of what's unfolding and every thought going through your mind? I had one of those moments. I'm approaching the rapids, and the first thing I do as I try and get away from them. And I'm realizing real quickly that is not working. So I cleverly decide not to resist. Let's go with the flow. But then I think as these rapids are getting closer and closer and my fear is building up, I can taste it, it's tangible, it's palpable. And I'm picturing that raft flipping over years ago and I'm thinking, okay, that's not what I want. What do I want? What thought do I want to hold to replace my fear thought? And the first thing that came to my mind was balance. That makes sense, doesn't it? I want to balance this kayak so I make it through the rapids upright. I grab the side of my little boat and I'm thinking balance, 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 balance. And I thought, okay, what else do I need? And the next thought that came to mind was breathe. I didn't realize up until that moment I'd been holding my breath. And the third thought I'd already figured out, don't fight it. Go with the flow. Balance, breath, non-resistance. Hit those rapids head on and sailed right through them. It was really a kick. But let's talk about those three things that came to my mind in that moment. And I want to be clear, if you're in a fearful moment, if you're addressing your fears, you might have other divinely inspired thoughts. So whatever's appropriate for you, trust that Spirit will give it to you. Balance. Well, balance keeping the kayak upright was pretty obvious. But as spiritual seekers, balance is important too. And it starts before you hit the river and before you're facing the rapids. I'm talking about the balance between living everyday life and being a spiritual being. How often do we get caught up in life as it's coming at us faster and faster and faster? And we think, oh gee, I don't have time to meditate. I don't have time to go to church. I don't have time to gather with my spiritual friends because there's too much going on. In that moment, you're out of balance. As people on a spiritual journey, we need balance. Yes, we need to engage with life in this world around us, but we need to nurture that spiritual facet of us. And we do it with our daily spiritual practices. I know that the answers that came to me as I faced that huge wave of white water, well, that wave of white water, I know that what came to me came from the work I had done before that moment, from creating balance in my life by focusing as much on spiritual principles and living from them as focusing on my spiritual practices as much as living life in general. We all need balance. And when we're in a place of balance, fear is a more difficult time catching our attention. But catch our attention it will. And what I did in that moment when I was feeling fear is, I stopped breathing. Breath is important. You know, we do it every day, all day long. We do it all night long, and we don't give breath the credit it's due. Think about it. Where would you be without it? Yeah? Okay. Breath and breathing. We don't often recognize it as a significant part of our spiritual journey, but it is. When I teach meditation classes, we always work with a 4-count breath. A long, deep inhalation that distends the tummy. And you hold that breath for a moment, a comfortable moment. And then a complete exhalation. And then at the end of that breath, a pause. Inhale, hold, exhale, and relax. This is actually the way you breathe when you sleep. This is your body's natural way of doing its own deep breathing to replenish and restore itself. But when we're in our busy life, we don't breathe like that, do we? And then when life gets fearful, we start to breathe real shallowly, those chest breaths. We almost hyperventilate. Our Buddhist friends tell us that fear doesn't cause pain. It's our resistance to it, our inability to breathe through it. That's where the pain comes from. As I was going through this process, approaching this monstrous wall of water, that balance, breath, and non-resistance. And further to the idea of breath, I remembered something I'd learned a long time ago, many years ago, when I was newly on a spiritual path. I was doing some deep personal work that involved some very specific deep breathing processes. And I was going to this class for weeks, and a lot of stuff was coming up that I was able to look at and resolve. But along with this class was a syllabus, a manual, a book. And one of the things the book talked about is when you're breathing deeply and properly, you cannot feel fear. And my first thought was, yeah, right. I'm a skeptic. Don't tell me, prove it to me. And I realized that was one of those things that I needed to prove to myself. When you're feeling fear, if you breathe deeply through it, you can no longer feel the fear. So I started playing with that in different circumstances in my life. And at one point, I was out with a bunch of friends, and we were someplace where there was a roller coaster. I love roller coasters. I love going up high and dropping down fast and whipping around corners. That's a kick. It's great fun. And I thought, okay, we're going to try this breath thing on the roller coaster. So I got on the roller coaster, and I started doing my 4-count breath. Long, slow, deep breaths. And the roller coaster went way up to the top. And I was doing my deep breathing. And then it dropped down to the bottom and around a corner. And I was still doing my deep breathing. And I went through that whole roller coaster ride without once feeling the kick of fear or adrenaline. It really works. If you're in fear, breathe through it. It's going to ruin roller coasters for you. But for me, it was a great lesson. When we're breathing deeply, we cannot feel fear. So for Spirit to remind me of that while I'm in the middle of the Cannon River approaching these death-defying rapids, I needed to remember that. Breathe. And of course, non-resistance. Go with the flow, and in that moment, in a very literal way. So I kept breathing, doing those long, slow, deep breaths. I focused my thoughts on balance, not on crashing and burning. And I didn't resist what was happening. And what happened is that kayak sailed through the rapids. It was really kind of fun. I got through those rapids, and I was feeling so proud of myself that I didn't panic and I didn't flip over, and I made it through the rapids, and all was well. And about the time I'm realizing that, gee, I got through them, I used all these spiritual principles, and it was actually kind of fun. Right up ahead, there's like another set of rapids. And beyond that, another set of rapids. So I have a river and its rapids teaching me step by step how to manage my fear about rapids. And each time I've navigated through another set of rapids using, for me, those 3 basic things, balance, breath, and non-resistance, every time I went through it became easier and easier. You see, those rapids became my spiritual teacher. They created a situation for me to learn from. But that's not all they did. You see, as I'm sailing down the river in my little kayak and navigating one set of rapids after another, I begin to realize that rapids can be really fun, as long as you stay upright. And I'd already figured that part out. Then I realized something really interesting. Where there are rapids in the river, it's typically where the river narrows, and the current is stronger, it's over rocks, that's what creates rapids. You know why they call them rapids, don't you? Because they whip you through and down the river rapidly. And that's exactly what happens. When you hit the rapids, when you're caught up in the current, you go zooming through the rapids and beyond, because now you've got the current helping you. You see, the rapids, that thing that I thought was so fearful, not only did it teach me a lesson, not only did it become fun, but what was fearful to me now became my friend. Because as those rapids moved me down the river rapidly, I didn't have to do nearly as much paddling. It was so much easier going through the rapids and letting the current carry me. In some of the quieter sections of the river, I had a moment to pause and reflect. And I thought, where does fear come from? Well, the rocks were there in the water. They were fearful to me, but the rocks themselves weren't fear. And the water, well, the water's water, the river's the river, and other than the scenario it created together, there wasn't fear there. And it came to me that the only place fear existed was not on the river, not on the rocks, not in the trees and the shores on either side. The only place where that fear existed was right here in my head. And that was exciting to me, because then I realized, well, if it's just here, guess who's in charge? You know, there's a reason Unity's called New Thought, right? We are New Thought spiritual seekers. And so I created new thoughts as I went down the river around rapids and getting through them. Not that they were fearful and they were going to dump me and smash me in the rocks. My new thoughts were about breathing and balance and going with the flow. As the river was teaching me, as the river became my friend, I began to really enjoy the day. And if I had given into that fear, I would have missed so much. I would have missed time with my friends and my husband. It was a day like today, beautiful outside, blue skies, fluffy clouds. There were eagles on the river. It's almost like they were guiding us. They'd fly ahead of us and wait a little bit, and when we get caught up, they'd fly ahead of us further. There were turtles on the logs, sunning in the sunshine. At one point, there was a whole family of geese, mom and dad, and the little goslings that accompanied us. If I had given into my fear, I would have missed all that. More than anything, though, I would have missed the lesson on facing my fear and the fulfillment, the sense of achievement that comes from rising above one's fear. What are you afraid of? What causes your heart to pound and your breathing to get really shallow? It's okay. Bless yourself and simply acknowledge, oh, this is fear. And then recognize fear's here. It's not out there. And ask the Christ presence in you. What new thoughts, what spiritual ideas can I apply to this situation that will not only move me through my fear, but that will transform my fear in some way, shape, or form into my friend. It's all up to us. As Charles Fillmore reminds us, one of the greatest gifts the divine created for us is the power to select our thoughts. Whatever you're feeling fear about, stop. Where are you at in terms of balance? Make sure you've got your spiritual practices shored up. Breathe and go with the flow. And even though that fear does appear, you can master it. You can have control, and you can shoot through to the other side, better, stronger, and more confident. That's what Rollin' on the River is all about.